Okay, we're going to start recording now. And the first thing I want to make sure, last time we had somebody that couldn't hear me. So on the right side of your screen, if you have the question or the chat window open, can everybody hear me okay? Or can most people hear me okay? And okay, it looks like Victoria, thank you. Looks like you can hear me. So let's go ahead and get started. So again, my name is Noah. And I'm with Shortcuts. I'm one of the educators here. Today, we're going to do a sort of second part on the Cloud Appointment Book. If you attended last week or if you missed last week's session, it was sort of an introduction to the Cloud Appointment Book. Some of the basics of navigating, some of the basics of reporting. So now we're going to actually dig into the system. So if you're new to the Cloud Appointment Book, if you're not quite sure how to give your staff or even yourself permission to access it, that's what we're going to review today. So let's go to the next slide, the one without the music. So of course, like our other presentations, this is approximately 30 minutes. We are recording this session. We will be sharing a link with everybody when we're done, and hopefully you can hear me. And we will allow time for questions and answers at the very end. So today's focus on the Cloud Appointment Book. If you're new to it or you've used it sparingly because you weren't quite sure how to limit access specifically for your employees, we're going to learn how to give them access and then how to adjust their security settings. So how to create new roles in case, let's say you have a manager or an assistant manager and you want them to have more access than the employees, but not necessarily all of the access that you currently have. So you can actually create a new role. And then something that's new, something that we rolled out at the end of last year, how to set up targets for your business and of course your staff. And then where to go when you want to review these targets, these goals. So how do you get to the cloud? If you've used Shortcuts online services in the past, you should be familiar with the console. So that's console.shortcutsoftware.com. Your username or your staff's username is usually an email address. And then you would have had a randomly generated password, and hopefully you've changed your password by now. So in the console, this is where you would normally go to set up your Shortcuts online settings, like online booking. If you're giving your customers certain instructions for online booking, this is where you adjust it. If you're uploading your logo for online booking, or if you have My Local Salon, which is a directory listing, this is how you add your logo, your description. This is also where you would go to if you were using Spotlight to send out surveys to customers so that you can review them and share them. So previously, these were some of the online services Shortcuts had, but we've added a new button that says the Shortcuts Cloud, and it's a little white icon with a little cloud logo. So it introduces you to our second web page. Now, you can go directly to the cloud web page. You do not necessarily have to go through the console. So if you haven't already bookmarked it on your computer, you probably want to bookmark POS, short for point of sale, .shortcutsoftware.com. Your username and your password is exactly the same as what it would be if you were logging into the console. So again, it's your email and whatever password you're using. So let's make that distinction. The console is where you would adjust your online booking settings, your Spotlight surveys, and you can give your staff some permissions to access either the console or the cloud from the console page itself. And we're going to make that distinction in just a little bit. So when it comes to giving your staff access, again, previously, you would normally go through the Shortcuts console, and we are going to do a live demonstration of that. But if you want to bypass that directly, if you're already in the cloud and you just want to give your staff, your team members permission to access the cloud, then at the very top of the screen, you're going to go to your menu button, and then you're going to go to employees and rosters. So hopefully all of your staff members are already in your Shortcuts point of sale system. So those will start to synchronize here, and it will show you their basic information. You'll have their name, first and last, and whether or not they have access to the cloud. So when you go to your employee list on the left side of the screen, if you want to give them permission to access the cloud, at the bottom of the screen, there's a button that says Roles and Login. It looks like a little circle with a star on it. When you press that button, Shortcuts will say, does this staff member have permission to access the cloud? Yes or no. If you have your staff's email address, you'll want to enter that. And then there's just a little slider, a little toggle switch that will allow you to say login access, yes. So once you do that, once you save those settings, the staff member is going to get an email that says this is your username, this is your password, and this is the link to the cloud. So that when they log in, they get to access the features that you're limiting them to. In the cloud, the two default permission settings are employee and site manager. If you're an owner, then you already have both of those permissions. You have all of the permissions of the employee plus all of the permissions of the site manager. So as you can imagine, site managers can see and configure just about everything in the cloud. So this is why you want to be careful. If you think your manager should also have that permission, just think about if you want them to have permission to lock you out of the cloud and give other staff members permission to access the cloud. So be very sparing with who you make site managers. So if we're going to change employee access, or if we're going to change the default access for the staff members, how would we configure this? So we're still in the cloud. We would go back to menu, but instead of employees and rosters, we're going to general settings, and we're going to press that roles button. Again, the circle with the star. Once we're there, Shortcuts will show you these are my two default settings, employee or site manager. So you'll choose which one of those permissions do you want to adjust. And then once you're in the role setup, then you click a little slider that says yes or no. They're going to have access to this in the appointment book or this in the security. And we're actually going to go into the cloud so I can give you a demonstration. So we'll hop out of here and into the cloud. So this is a salon I'm working with. They haven't opened their doors yet, so I can go in here and make those adjustments. So again, if your staff is new and you want to give them some permission to access the cloud, you're going to go to the menu button at the top, Employees and Schedules, and when you click the Employees button, you're going to choose which staff member should have permission to access the cloud. So I'll go to Stylist 1. At the very bottom of the screen, I'll press Roles and Login. And this is where Shortcuts asks me, should they have login access? Please provide a username and an email. And both username and email should be the same. So I would just fill in that blank. And then when I press done, and yeah, I'd say login access, yes. Once I press done, that stylist will get an email. But if I want to review those permissions, if I want to take a look and perhaps enable or disable certain permissions, this is where I would return to menu, go to my general settings, and again, this little sheriff's badge, the star. And here are your two main categories, employee and site manager. So as I said previously, a site manager can see and do absolutely everything. An employee has less permission. But if I want to adjust some of those permissions, the appointment book, for example, or the general settings or the customer settings, to access that, I actually click on the word permissions on the right side. So this pink, this salmon colored link, when you click on it, then Shortcuts says, okay, for each of these specific categories, which permissions are you going to allow or disallow? So I can return to the appointment book. Should my employees have the ability to look at appointments of other users, of other staff members? By default, it's no. When an employee logs into the cloud, they can really only see themselves. So should they be able to put appointments on the books of other users, other staff members? So if you have perhaps a receptionist that should have a little bit more visibility, then absolutely you can toggle these settings. And then once you press done, the staff member is not going to get another email with a new password. Their permissions are just going to be updated the next time they go into the cloud. So you're absolutely welcome to customize your existing settings. These are the ones that Shortcuts recommends, but you don't have to use them if they don't seem the best for your salon or your spa or even your barbershop. But if you decide, okay, well, I want to create a custom level, something for my assistant manager that's not quite a site manager permission, but certainly more elevated than an employee, then to do that, at the bottom of the screen, there's a little circle with a plus button that allows you to press new and actually create a custom role. And once you create your custom role, you can then tell Shortcuts who should have permission to access this, who has this specific level. So you can give it a name, you can call it Assistant Manager or Employee Plus or Receptionist, and then just go through the list and say, what can they do, yes or no? So let's jump back to the presentation and let's review those steps. So we now know how to create an account. We know how to go into the actual cloud settings and then change some of those default settings. But if you want to create a new role, let's review the steps. So when you're in role setup, that little new plus button, you're going to give your role a name. You're going to go through the permissions, customize the options, and then select which employee should have this role. This is something that's very important about your online settings. Whether it's the cloud or whether it's the console, you can have employees that have more than 2 roles assigned to them. So you can have a staff member that has employee permission and has receptionist permission. And even if one of those permissions is in conflict with the other, let's say an employee does not have permission to look at another staff member's schedule, but you also assign them receptionist permission. And the receptionist permission says, yes, they do. They can see another employee schedule and they can make appointments on it. In that case, the receptionist permission will supersede the default employee permission. And of course, you can have an employee and a site manager access, which is what all of the owners, all of the managers should have. So those site manager settings override all of your default employee settings. So just keep that in mind. If you decide perhaps on weekends, one of your staff members becomes your receptionist, so you can toggle between their permissions. Okay, I hope that makes sense for everybody. Oh, we already did our live demo. So let's go to the next slide. So the other thing about the cloud is once you start giving your staff permission to access the cloud, access the appointment book, see what the settings are, you can also give them permission to look at some of the reports. Now, by default, the reports and Shortcuts in the cloud really focus only on their numbers. They don't necessarily see the business numbers, they don't see their coworkers' numbers. But something that can help your staff grow is if they start to learn what should their targets be, whether it's in service, whether it's in retail, whether it's in rebooking, from month to month. how should they improve themselves and how will it help the business? So as an owner, as a manager, you need to start coming up with targets for your business and targets for your staff. So the best place to get started is actually in the console. So in the console, you have something called the scorecard. And the scorecard reviews your business from month to month and even year to year on key performance indicators, your KPIs. And these are on very specific sections that are important for your business. We're looking at revenue, transactions, client visits, and online bookings. So you'll see how you're doing from month to month, and you'll see how you compare against the industry averages. So you'll actually see for a business about your size that does about your same business, are you trending with them? Are you doing better? Are you doing worse? Or are you just holding steady from month to month? And that is in the console. The picture that you actually see in the console will change depending on what your settings are from month to month. So I'll give you a preview. So in this site, this is one of the salons. Again, it hasn't opened yet, so there's technically no real information to look at. But right where it says scorecard, there's a picture of clouds in the sky. What that picture represents is neutral data. The site is staying exactly the same from month to month. There's no real growth, there's no real loss in business or productivity. If once this site goes live, the next month they go into the scorecard and they see a bright sunny sky, then that means that the majority of the business categories are actually trending up. And if the owner of the salon goes into the console and they click on the scorecard and they actually see a picture is a dark stormy sky with lightning bolts, that means the categories are trending down. So in which case, if you were the owner, you'll absolutely want to click on the scorecard and find out in which categories is my business trending down. And Shortcuts will give you a breakdown for every one of these key performance categories. So for my transactions, how far down are my transactions going from month to month? My customer visits, my client retention, my online bookings. How am I doing? And once you start to find those little openings, then you know exactly where you can start to set your targets against. So let's go back to the presentation. So if you're not currently using your console, if you're not looking at your scorecard, you may want to go back and double check those numbers. If your site is not generating information, then you absolutely want to contact the help desk because there is an agent in Shortcuts that should be synchronizing this information. So if there's a category that's missing or a category that's not generating numbers, let the help desk know right away. Here's the other side to that. If you are a brand new site to Shortcuts, some of these reports don't generate right away. Shortcuts needs to be able to spot a trend in certain categories. So some of these KPIs will not appear until your third or fourth month in business. And then Shortcuts will say, okay, for the last couple of months, you've been trending this way or that way. So if you're brand new to Shortcuts and you go to the scorecard and they look blank, then give yourself another month or two. Shortcuts is still calculating what your trends are. So once you start to see how your business is trending in specific categories, then you'll want to set a target for your staff and for your business against those certain categories. So once you go back to the cloud, you want to go to Menu, Employees and Schedule, and then go to Targets Setup. And the icon actually looks like a target. So it's the same place you would go to when you want to give your staff permission, employees and schedules, but instead of clicking the employee names, you're going to targets. So what can the owners, what can the managers actually set their goals against? So roughly the same key performance indicators that the scorecard keeps track of are almost the same things for your business. So we're looking at net sales, service sales, retail sales, rebooking percentages, and average dollars over for ticket plus customer visits. So the reason you want to set KPIs for your staff and not just for your business is because it helps your employees learn what are the areas they need to focus on. So even if you have an employee that is exceptional when it comes to cutting hair, perhaps they're not too good when it comes to upselling certain products, and they have an intense product knowledge. So they know exactly what works best, but maybe they're not communicating that. So if you can give them a goal, hey, can you try to upsell one or two products every month? Because this is going to increase your bottom line and, of course, the business bottom line. And if the staff can track it, then all the better. So you can set those goals for each individual member of your team. And you can also set the goal for your business so you can see how you're trending. So once you set up your targets, where do you go to take a look at them? So again, in the Shortcuts Cloud, you'll go to Menu, Reports, and Targets. Now, by default, if you give your employees permission to look at the targets, they only see their own targets. They do not see business targets. So it'll show them that actual tile for all of the goals that you set for them. And they'll actually see a graph. Are you meeting your goal? Are you exceeding your goal? Are you a little bit behind your goal? So this helps them sort of stay motivated to try to hit those goals. And you can always set the date range, or your employees can look at the last week, this week, or even the last 2 weeks to see if they're on track to hit their goal. And to set those date ranges in the cloud on the top right corner, when you're looking at any report, there's a little calendar button, which will let you set what's your date range. If you are a salon owner that has multiple sites, you can actually see your targets for multiple or single locations by using your options. And the same goes for your staff. Do you want to look at your overall targets for the entire team or just one or two members? So before we go to the next slide, let's actually take a look at this. Okay, so in this case, if I were going to give this salon targets for my staff members, in the cloud, I'll go to Menu, Employees and Schedules. Now, this site is brand new. They haven't even enabled targets for this site, so I don't think they're going to open for another month. So let's jump back and let's see if I can find a salon. Bear with me. That has some targets set against it. I believe Palm does. Let's take a look. There we go. So menu, employees and rosters, and target setup. So for the business, it's always the very first one on the list. What would my targets be? And is it for every week? My net sales, how should they be? My retail. And then once I set it for the business, I can go down the list and then assign targets for each of my staff members. And when a staff member logs in and a staff member goes to reports under menu, when they click on a specific category, again, it only shows them their own individual targets or their own individual performance. So don't be alarmed. Don't think that the staff is just going to be able to see all of your numbers. Now, of course, the downside is I haven't set up any targets, So this is going to say there's nothing to show. But you get the idea. And it's actually generating a graph for me. And it's going to be a graph with no data. So just keep in mind, if you're not currently using your console, go into the scorecard, see how you're doing from month to month. And if you're doing great across the board, then that's fine. But if you're down in one or two categories, consider setting a target for yourself and your team to try to improve in those KPIs. Right? Let's go back to the presentation. So now you should be a little more familiar with accessing the console, accessing the cloud, giving your staff permission, how to edit, customize those levels of permission, how to set up targets for yourself and your business, and of course, how to review those numbers. So this is the part of the presentation where we always say, if you're using an old version of shortcuts, and it happens every week, somebody tells me, oh, well, we've had shortcuts for about 10 years. We've never run an upgrade. We don't use any of the online features. We didn't even know you had online booking. Please consider upgrading your version of shortcuts to take advantage of everything in the console plus everything in the cloud. So go ahead and reach out to our customer care team. And if you don't have this number handy or you don't have this email, you can always reach us on Facebook. So if you're using an outdated version of shortcuts, consider getting an upgrade because there's so many features that have been released in the past year, in the past 2 years, that you're really missing out on these things. So let's open up the floor for questions. So if you have questions on the console, on the cloud, on configuration, now's your chance. On the right side of the screen, you should have a question or even a little chat window open. And I'm going to open it on my side. So let's see what questions are coming up. And I'll check the chat window as well. So far, so good. And I have a feeling some people are writing down notes very quickly. Oh, okay. No questions on the console, no questions on the cloud or giving permissions. Oh, there we go. If I customize the employee role in the general settings, can I copy these settings to other employees? Good question. So in the console, or actually in the cloud, let's jump over. The way that these settings work is once you create a custom level, then Shortcuts will always retain what that custom level is. So if you were to go to general settings and create a new role, and I'll just create a new placeholder role. I'll call this assistant manager. I'll say it's active for now. I don't necessarily have to choose who's going to have this role specifically. First thing I want to do is just go through the list and say, yes, they can do this, yes, they can do this, etc., etc. So once I save this role, once I press done, now when I return to menu, employees and schedules, so now as I go through the staff and I decide they should have a certain level of permission, on the right side, now there's a new option, assistant manager. So you don't really copy this role again and again and give it to your staff. Once you create the role, you can just pick and choose with a checkbox who has permission to access this level. Right? Does that make a little bit more sense? And let me go back and deactivate this before the owner of the salon says, why do I have a custom setting? I did not create that. No, Ken, you did not create this. This was me. There. Now it's inactive. Does that also work for the employee and site manager role? Yes. So all of your default settings, your role settings for the cloud, if you were to give any one of these staff members the employee permission, then everybody would have the same visibility that we already have by default. But if I were to give them site manager and employee access, remember, whatever site managers are allowed to see will override what employees are not allowed to see. Does that make sense? So when I go to roles and login, I can just click the checkboxes on the right side and say, yes, you have employee permissions with all of the specific settings that I created, all of the specific roles. But if you also have assistant manager permission or site manager permission, then you have more permissions than the employee normally gets. So just keep that in mind. So if you want to have a very specific set of permissions that maybe one or two people should have that nobody else has, then when you create that role, that custom role for that staff member, then when you decide to give those certain people that permission, then they should be the only ones, the only employees that you click that checkbox on. So perhaps stylist 1 is the only person that should have assistant manager. Did that answer that, or just make your question more complex? Okay. Is there anybody else that has questions on permissions or settings, especially for those that have been using Anywhere previously in Shortcuts? So in the console, if you already gave your staff permission to access the console, to access Anywhere, look at their own appointment book, then they technically already have access to the cloud. It's the same username and same password. Just remember the address is different. It's going to be pointofsale.shortcutsoftware.com and usually /site and your site ID number. But your staff should be able to log in with just this first part. Pointofsale.shortcutsoftware.com. Okay, if there are no other questions, we'll go back to the slideshow. So last little bit, if you have any questions after today's presentation, or if you think of something after the fact, go ahead and give us a call or send us an email. And you can always reach us on Facebook as well. So we do check that. We do answer questions there. So if you've dropped out, you're going to get a link a little bit later today for anything that we talked about. And of course, we always have classroom sessions available every Tuesday morning. So I hope to see most of you back for that. And I do see some familiar faces now. So thank you for returning. I hope this covers all of your questions. If you think of anything else, just let us know. And I look forward to seeing most of you again next week. So have a great day, everybody. We'll send out the link shortly.